And finally, I'd like to introduce Donna Holt, who's a state coordinator for Campaign for Liberty, executive director for Virginia Campaign for Liberty, a state coordinator for Ron Paul in Virginia, and she has anybody who's anybody in Virginia who's fighting on the side of the angels knows who she is. She works tirelessly there on behalf of all good causes, and I'm delighted to have the opportunity to introduce to you Donna Holt.
Thank you. Thank you. I was going to start off with a couple of jokes, but I forgot the congressional record. I left it at home. But I'm delighted to be here with all you C4Lers in Iowa. You know, I did have a little trouble in the airport, though. You know how they tell you that if you tie something unusual or easily identifiable on your bag, it makes it much easier to identify it at baggage checkout? Well, I have one of these bags that looks like 100 other bags. So I had the idea that if I put a Ron Paul bumper sticker wrapped around the handle, I'd be able to grab it real quick and get out of the airport. Well, imagine my surprise when I discovered there were about a half dozen other bags with the Ron Paul bumper sticker wrapped around the handle. I should have known coming to a Campaign for Liberty event that that was a possibility, so it wasn't a very well thought out plan. The moral to that story is that when you think you have a great idea, there's always somebody else who's beating you to it. But I can't tell you what a treat it is for me to hear all of your stories here in Iowa, and I'm very grateful for an opportunity to share with you what we've been up to in Virginia. You know, I grew up in a very conservative household. My parents typically voted conservative, so we all know what party that would be. But they didn't talk much about politics, and they weren't politically active. But I am acutely aware of some major events that happened throughout my lifetime that impacted the way we lived our lives. I recall changes in school policy, where we had a daily ritual of Pledge of Allegiance and the 23rd Psalm, to no pledge and no prayer. And then I remember when Lyndon Johnson became president, I heard about something called the Great Society. I thought, well, what is the Great Society? So I went to the library. We didn't have the internet back then, and I did a little research. And I learned the Great Society was nothing more than code for socialism. Then I went on to lose an uncle and a couple of friends in the undeclared Vietnam War. Then I found myself years later having to reassure my daughter when her boyfriend went to fight in the undeclared Gulf War, Then came the Patriot Act and Real ID. And that's when I lost all hope for America. Until I heard about Ron Paul's campaign in 2007. And finally, there was some hope. So I volunteered and became a coordinator for that campaign. But until then, I had lived with my apathy, not knowing what I could do about the problems that were going on in government. But I finally gathered together, I think it was 37 Ron Paul supporters, took them with me to our first GOP meeting in our county unit, and we all filed to be delegates to the district and the state convention. But they were ready for us, and there was no way they were going to allow us to be delegates to the national convention. But as the campaign came to an end and the Rally for the Republic was announced, I again got together some of our friends and some of our greatest activists during the Ron Paul campaign and convinced them to join me. And I packed my passion and my hope along with a few clothes, and we headed off to Minnesota, having no idea what we'd come back with other than our disappointment. There I attended the Leadership Summit and Mike Rothfeld's grassroots training. And all dyslexia and ADD aside, I managed to listen very carefully and take some good notes. And I brought home with me to Virginia a legislative campaign we call Stop Dangerous ID. By then, I only knew 2 legislators that I thought would possibly carry our bills, and it just so happened that one was a member of the House and one was a senator, and they were both bulldogs, just the kind of legislator you wanted to carry your bill. So I did some research and I found the language of a bill that had passed in South Carolina, and I came up with the top 10 reasons to reject real ID, contacted the legislators and got them to agree to carry the bills for us. And we were halfway there. I was very excited. I was well on my way to my first legislative campaign. I contacted other other members of Campaign for Liberty in Virginia, and we built a coalition of some very diverse groups. We had a Democratic-controlled Senate, and so we even brought on board the ACLU, and they were very instrumental in us getting the Democrats on board in the Senate. After a rally and some successful lobbying, our bill to prohibit certain dangerous provisions of real ID passed both the House and the Senate and was signed into law by a Democratic governor in July of 2009. Well, with all the enthusiasm that we could muster, right away we started planning our next legislative campaign. And we launched that campaign in November of 2009, calling it the Virginia 10th Amendment Revolution, around 2 10th Amendment bills. All the Tea Party groups were cropping up then. So we decided to reach out to them, took them under our wings, held some training meetings teaching them about the legislative process and what we had done effectively lobbying the legislature. And we built a coalition of more than 30 organizations. We held a rally and lobby day, and 2,400 of them showed up. They gathered at the state capitol to lobby their legislators. And I want to tell you that there had never been a rally with more attendees than 500 in the history of the Virginia legislature. So this was a pretty big deal to have 2,400 people show up. Our first bill, the Virginia Firearms Freedom Act, had the overwhelming bipartisan support in the House with a vote of 70 to 29. But it was killed in the Senate by a Democrat anti-gun senator who would not allow a recorded vote in the Senate.